All right. Well, today we are covering a number of chapters. This is the largest grouping of chapters, I think, of the entire year. And we may not be able to get through everything. If we don't, I think next week is actually kind of short. So next week can pick up where we left off. But essentially, we are in the middle of a big war between the Lamanites and the Nephites. And it's a fascinating war because Amalickiah, he was a Nephite. And he tried to become king of the Nephites. That didn't work. He received resistance, and the Nephites were able to take down his army. He escaped to the Lamanites, and then surprisingly quickly, he was able to assert authority over the Lamanites and take the leadership of the Lamanites. So it's really fascinating, this guy. But at the end of chapter 23, which Jeff wasn't able to get to last week because of time, but at the end of the chapter 23, we have Teancum battling Amalickiah's army, and then at night he sneaks out of his camp, goes into Amalickiah's camp, and takes a javelin into the heart of Amalickiah and ends Amalickiah's life. He then sneaks out and gets back into his army. So that's really where we finish up in chapter 24. But we start off on chapter 20. Excuse me. That's where we end on chapter 24 and where we start off on chapter 23, 24. Yeah. But we start off with chapter 24, and it says, "And it came to pass that the brother of Amalickiah was appointed king over the people, and his name was Ammoron. Thus King Ammoron, the brother of King Amalickiah, was appointed to reign in his stead." So the big question that probably we all have about these war chapters is, why do we have the war chapters? I was listening to a talk by Denver while I was exercising this week, and he talked about how the Book of Mormon really is not, and I'm paraphrasing Denver, I'm probably using more of my words than him, but the Book of Mormon really is not a history. It's so abbreviated, so edited for our purposes, for us today. Mormon in his book says, "I have seen your day and I know you're doing." And essentially this, what he edited, what he organized, they estimate it's 0.5% of their history when it comes to a linear time. That why did Mormon put so many war chapters in the Book of Mormon? I want to make a couple of suggestions, and we're going to highlight those, my suggestions throughout this lesson. Is that we talk a lot, there's a lot of doctrinal chapters in the Book of Mormon. This really is communicating applicability, or I don't know if that's the best word. It's communicating them in action. It's communicating behavior, which is fascinating, because there's a lot of behavior here that is really righteous and a lot of behavior here that is not. And even those who, we're going to talk about this at the end, hopefully we have enough time. Even some of the behavior at the end from someone who is righteous, you could say is coming off a little bit too aggressive. So it's really fascinating going through this, but I'm actually going to skip down. We get into the Lamanites have this city, and the Nephites have this city, and Teancum's trying to take this city, and I mean, we have a lot of that. But let me jump to a couple situations that I really, really enjoy. I'm going to jump down to paragraph 15, and we're going to talk about Moroni. Oh, sorry, I need to show my screen. Goodness. Well, there you go. So I was just talking about, and it came to pass that the brother of Amalickiah was appointed king over the people, and his name was Amron. Thus King Amron, the brother of Amalickiah, was appointed king in his stead. Okay. Now I'm going to jump down all the way to paragraph 15, and it gives a shout out, and it says. And it came to pass that they did set guards over the prisoners of the Lamanites. Let me make sure this is it. Okay. Lamanites, and did compel them to go forth and bury their dead, yea, and also the dead of the Nephites who were slain. And Moroni placed men over them to guard them whilst they should perform their labors. Moroni went into the city of Mulek with Lehi and took command of the city and gave it unto Lehi. Now behold, Lehi was a man who had been with Moroni in the more part of his battles, and he was a man like unto Moroni, and they rejoiced in each other's safety, and they were beloved by each other, and also beloved by the people of Nephi. What I wanted to talk about is so if we want to look at these and I would like to use the word archetypes. If we look at these archetypes in the Book of Mormon, these individuals and what they mean to the story and what they mean to the situation and what they mean to us, Lehi was like unto Moroni. What does that mean? What was Moroni like? We talk about this in our previous lesson last week with the title of Liberty. But why is Moroni special, and why is Lehi special, and why should we care? I want to make a suggestion that desire and action are really directly correlated with each other. We know that Moroni just desires, and we're going to read a little bit about this towards the end of the section today. Moroni just desires liberty and freedom and the cause of his religion. Moroni isn't interested in power and authority. He isn't interested in titles. He's not interested in setting himself up to be a light. He's interested in his he's interested in that which is good. It's a very pure and this needs to happen and let's go make it happen type attitude. And I think that's very noble. I think lots of times we desire something, but we don't act on it. Moroni isn't that type of person. And sometimes we don't desire it at all. But Moroni desires these things, desires the safety and the liberty of his people, and he also acts to make it happen. it reminds me of the 80-20 rule. You know, the 80-20 rule essentially says 80%, or excuse me, 20% of people produce 80% of the results. And in many times that is often skewed, so it's either even a far less amount than 20%. I think Moroni counts as that, and it's the balance of, you know, doing what is right and making that thing happen. So, you know, we learn a lot about Moroni, and Moroni is an interesting archetype to look at within the Book of Mormon. And I think it's very conscious that Mormon is putting the Moroni character, the Moroni archetype in the Book of Mormon, and he's also putting the Lehi archetype in the Book of Mormon and the Teancum archetype. That these individuals, though they existed, also are good examples for being just and true in the things that we need to do. I'm going to jump down to paragraph 17. And I'm going to highlight this section right here. Well, let me read the whole thing because it adds context. And it came to pass that Moroni had thus gained a victory over one of the greatest armies of the Lamanites, and had obtained the possession of the city Mulek, which was one of the strongest holds of the Lamanites in the land of Nephi. And thus he had also built a stronghold to retain his prisoners. And it came to pass that he did no more attempt a battle with the Lamanites in that year, but he did employ his men in preparing for war, yea, in making fortifications to guard against the Lamanites, yea, and also delivering the women and their children from famine and affliction, and providing food for their armies. I just wanted to highlight this because, again, it communicates behaviors that are notable within Moroni. One of the main behaviors is that Moroni never goes on the offensive. We never hear Moroni getting angry at the Lamanites and saying, you know what, they've done this and this and this to us. We should get our army and we should go and dismantle them in the land of Lehi Nephi, or go get them, go get the Lamanites. But Moroni is constantly, and this is not just true here. This is true in the chapters that we read last week. That Moroni is constantly preparing his men, constantly preparing, constantly setting up his defenses, constantly making fortifications. That this is something that he's doing. He's never staying idle. He's never falling back on his laurels. He is going and he's preparing his people. And I think that is a very fascinating and great archetype to look at for things that we should be doing, because how many times do we fall back on our laurels? How many times do we feel that all is well in Zion, that things are going great, that nothing could harm us or cause us any grief? We should probably look at the example of Moroni, because he's always preparing. He never is satisfied that things are safe. All right. Okay, I want to continue down. We're now getting into so essentially in this war, there are two battlefields happening. One battlefield is with, and we don't have the specific details of how this was, if it was drawing straws or these were where the captains of the army were residing, or these are the parts of the land that the captains of the armies had responsibilities for. But we do know that there are two sides of this battle. One side is with Lehi, Teancum, and Moroni with their armies. The other side is with Helaman and Antipas. And Antipas has a strong army. Helaman is, at the beginning, he doesn't have it. Well, he's really not in charge of anybody. But the people of Ammon are looking to break their covenant. So they made a covenant when they were converted to the Lord. And the covenant was that they buried their arms, their weapons of war, and they wouldn't take up weapons of war again. They're looking to potentially break that covenant, and Helaman suggests not, that potentially they could lose their souls if they did that. It's not a good thing. But their sons decide that it's appropriate to do that. So I'm going to read this. Now behold, there were 2,000 of those young men who entered into this covenant and took their weapons of war to defend their country. And now behold, as they never had hitherto been a disadvantage to the Nephites, they became now at this period of time also a great support. For they took their weapons of war, and they would that Helaman should be their leader. And they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage, and also for strength and activity. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. Okay, so we have 2,000 sons. Now this is, goodness, I want to say, it says in the chapter, but this is, I believe, like the 25th or the 26th year of the reign of the judges. I think I could go and find, it's somewhere around there. 26th year of the reign of the judges, okay? So this is 26th year of the reign of the judges. Ammon, Aaron, Omner, and Himni go to the land of Nephi to preach to the Lamanites just before the first year of the reign of the judges. They're in the land of Lehi Nephi for 14 years. And this is when 14 years is when the battles are happening and the Ammonites are getting slaughtered by the Lamanites without taking up any defense. If you remember back a few chapters earlier, they go out to meet the Lamanites, the Ammonites, and they don't bring their weapons of war. They just kneel down, and 1,000 get slaughtered, and then 1,000 are converted from the Lamanites. So this is the 13th and 14th year of the reign of the judges. So let's just say that within a year or two or three, that's when that covenant was made. So even on the low end, that's maybe the 10th year of the reign of the judges that this covenant is made. So you can imagine that these young men are potentially in their teens, 15, 16, 17. They're not adults, but they're teens. But there's some descriptions around them that are noteworthy. They were exceedingly valiant for courage. What does that mean? What does it mean to be exceedingly valiant for courage? I want to make a couple suggestions. This reminds me of David and Goliath. David and Goliath, the attributes of the David archetype is really fearless. He goes out and the armies of Israel are petrified because there's this Goliath character out, and Saul is not going to go out and defeat Goliath. He's not too confident about himself. You have the Philistines on the other side, but then you have this young boy who, David, who goes out there and he says to himself and to the people, well, in so many words, well, we're on God's team. This is God's army. We can slay this guy, and God's going to do it for us. When I think of the Ammonites and the 2,000 sons of Ammon, I think of the same type of attitude that perhaps they didn't think about their strength compared to the strength of the Lamanites, which is frequently how we measure things. Well, I'm this strong and this guy's that strong, so I can take him or he can take me. And perhaps the 2,000 sons didn't think about it in that context, but maybe it was more like David and Goliath, where we're on the right side. God is with us, and God will fight our battles for us. So we just need to show up, and God will do the rest of the work. It reminds me of Gideon's army. In Gideon's army, we start with 30,000, and then Gideon takes his army and winnows them down to 10,000, and the people are scared and petrified. And he winnows it down all the way to 300, and through 300 they defeat the army. And I think that is another fascinating example. I mean, if we truly have faith in God and we are willing to give our battles to Him, and we have the confidence, I think that, that's like the whole point of the lectures on faith. The lectures on faith are, well, first you have to believe in God. Then you have to have a correct understanding of who He is, not a false understanding. And then you need to have a witness from God to give you confidence that your course in life is according to His will. And once you get a witness, then your bowl of meal can go to zero. But with Elisha's promise, you can get bread even when you don't have anything in your bowl, because God's going to do the work for you. And I think that's the whole point of this, is that God is going to do this for you. And that's why the Ammonites were valiant for courage. To be valiant for courage. I think that there's applicability there, to be valiant for courage. All right. Also, and also strength and activity. I believe that there is a natural consequence with being enlightened by the Spirit, that a natural consequence is it gives you strength and you become more active. Whether it's industrious or whatever it is, I just don't know that many people who are in tune with the spirit that are idle and dormant. But those who have it are full of strength and activity. The other thing is they were men of truth and soberness. I think this is a really interesting one because, again, we're talking about boys, teenagers most likely, but this description is given to Mormon when he's given the plates, stewardship over the records, and he's only 10. But as a 10-year-old, Mormon is identified as one who is a sober child. But they were men of truth and soberness. What does it mean to be sober or to be men of truth and soberness?
Well, I think of it as individuals who are not influenced very much by the whimsy of the day or the fads and fancies of the days that they live in. So that, I mean, they're just kind of, I don't know, to me, they think kind of serious people about their lives and what they're about.
I think that's a good description. They are purposeful people about what life is about. I think that's you talked about whimsical fads of the day. I think people who are full of truth and soberness have a purpose that is in line with the purpose of life. That they're in tune. Their antennas are connected, and they're in tune with what life is all about, which very, very few people are in tune with that. All right, so we have the Ammonites. Any comments before we continue on? Okay. All right, so we have the Ammonites. Then we have, we're going into chapter 15, or excuse me, chapter 25. Oh, you know what? Sorry, before we go into chapter 25, I wanted to go into just a little bit more about the Ammonites. So, am I on 24? Yeah. So in chapter 24, oh, no, sorry. It is 25. All right, so we go on, and there's some interchange between Moroni and Amaron, the king of the Lamanites. Moroni, they're trying to do an exchange of prisoners. Moroni wants a wife and kids and a man with the exchange of one Lamanite prisoner. There's an exchange back and forth between Amaron and Moroni. They don't really like each other. That's pretty apparent with the exchange between them. I think that Moroni is justified, but it's kind of funny to listen to them. And let me highlight one of them. It's up here in paragraph 3. They're not in love with each other. That's absolutely true. I'm looking for it. Oh, this is Moroni. But behold, it supposes me that I talk to you concerning these things in vain, or supposes me that thou art a child of hell. Therefore, I will close my epistle by telling you that I will not exchange prisoners, save it on the condition that you deliver up a man, his wife, and his children for one prisoner. Going back to Moroni, there's the scripture that says the very gates of hell would shake if everybody was like unto Moroni. He also is not mincing for words. I mean, you're a child of hell. Lots of times we don't say what needs to be said, and people, and this is a case where this person Amram is not going to listen to Moroni, but I think there is cause to, in a very righteous way, to communicate sometimes what needs to be communicated. Because if it's not communicated, then the person that needs to hear certain things is left ignorant and without knowledge that they need to repent. But Moroni doesn't mince words. He says it like it is, and he says it like Amram needs to hear it. All right. Sorry, I'm going to skip through this fairly quickly because we have lots and lots to cover. Paragraph 8, I want to just highlight a couple things here. Let me find it. I think, where is it? Sorry, I'm looking through this paragraph to the exact place that I want to be. There we are. This again just shows us a little bit about Moroni. Moroni, again, is the head of all of the Nephite armies. And he says, behold, this was not the desire of Moroni. He did not desire in murder or bloodshed, but he delighted in saving his people from destruction. This is the captain of all the armies. I hope this could be said against our generals at the Pentagon. I hope this can be said against the head of the Army, the head of the Navy, the head of the Air Force. I think it could. I just hope it is. I hope, you have lots of concerns when, budgets get just expanded and expanded and expanded. I think it can be said against them. I don't know them, but I hope it continues to be that way. I hope it's said against the leadership of any army in any country. I don't think it can be said against any army in any country. There are those who are in positions of leadership in different countries within different armies that I don't know if this could be said against them. But behold, this was not the desire of Moroni. He did not desire in murder or bloodshed, but he delighted in saving his people from destruction. So, it just shows us a little bit more about Moroni. I'm going to jump down to chapter 26. Again, we're just rushing through this because we have so much to cover. There was one other thing in chapter 25 at the very bottom. This is talking about the Nephites. And God, the Nephites are really putting themselves in a sticky situation. So this whole war could have ended at the very beginning if the Nephites, if the kingmen in Zarahemla didn't raise up and fight the freemen in Zarahemla. because what that did is it diverted everybody's attention and the army's attention to quell this rebellion between the kingmen and the freemen, which allowed the Lamanites to come in and take a whole bunch of the Nephite country, many cities and many places of strength. They're continuing to have this this problem. And it says, but behold, the Nephites were slow to remember the Lord their God in their times of affliction. And we're gonna go over this in just a second. It's just a sad thing that the Nephites there's such fractions, and those fractions within the Nephites only are interested in power and authority. The vanity of and the temptation of that is so great to be seen as somebody special. Right. Next one, we're going to chapter 26. Okay, so chapter 26 is Helaman. Helaman is talking about all of the back and forth that he has just had on his side of the war. So he's over there with Antipas, and he has his 2,000 Ammonites, and they're trying to get the Lamanites out of their cities. So go down. And let's go. I want to highlight. Okay, we're back talking about the Ammonites. But behold, I would not suffer them that they would break this covenant that they had made, supposing that God would strengthen us, insomuch that we should not suffer more because of the fulfilling of the oath which they had taken. Okay, so this again is this is referring to the fathers of the 2,000 sons, and that the Lord would strengthen them. I want to make just a quick comment on that. It's really interesting to one of the greatest evidences of the Book of Mormon, outside of it's a miracle that all this doctrine is here. But if you're looking at the Book of Mormon, one of the great evidences of the Book of Mormon is the differences in language. And you think about it, how language changes and how grammar changes and how people's vocabulary change with times. The first instance that I can recall that the Book of Mormon refers to the strength of the Lord, or the Lord strengthening them in a very consistent manner, is with Zeniff. Zeniff talks about that a lot in his record, but that reference continues afterward. It's like it's built into their curriculum. It's built into their vocabulary, and it's one of the pillars of their faith, that God is a God that would strengthen them. It's interesting looking into the faith of the Nephites and getting an understanding of what was the hot topics of the day, what were the people focused on, and one of the big ones was being strengthened by the Lord. That's a topic that or a phrase that is used consistently as if it is a part of their doctrine and their view of God. God is there to strengthen them. So it's just an aside. Okay, I'm going to jump down to paragraph 4. This is also something that's interesting in their vocabulary. In paragraph 4, and this really goes hand in hand with what I just talked about. And thus were we favored of the Lord, for had they come upon us in our weakness, they might have perhaps destroyed our little army. But thus were we favored. They were commanded by Amram to maintain those cities which they had taken, and thus ended the 26th year. Okay, so this is also really interesting. So we have being strengthened by the Lord. And then, so in the context of this scripture, you have, they're trying to take the city of Cumeni. And how they're doing this is they take the small little 2,000 Ammonites and they march past the city of Cumeni. The goal is they wanted to draw out the armies of the Lamanites to follow the Ammonites so that the army of the Lamanites could pursue them. They're thinking that they're going against a small little band of Ammonites, but in reality, behind them is the Nephite army with Antipas and his men, and they pulled the armies out, and now they're battling each other. It has here being strengthened by the Lord, or being strengthened. The next is being favored of the Lord. This isn't popular doctrine. And that is that God favors one person over another. And that God strengthens one person over another. But the Book of Mormon clearly communicates that this is actually true. And it's based off of a prerequisite of following God's commandments and living righteously. If you follow God's commandments and live righteously, then God does favor you and God does strengthen you. Because this isn't said toward the Lamanites. The Lamanites weren't favored of the Lord, and the Lamanites weren't strengthened by the Lord. But the Nephites were, and the Ammonites were even further than that. It goes back to the King David, or the David and Goliath scenario. Poor little David is going out there with his sling against this massive Philistine, but David is favored of the Lord. Goliath is still, still a son of God. I mean, you could sing him, I am a child of God, and you sent me here. But David is the one who is strengthened, and David is the one who is favored, because David offers the sacrifice, and the sacrifice comes in the form of obedience. And that's why obedience and sacrifice are directly correlated with each other, or directly related. David offered the sacrifice of obedience. The Ammonites offered the sacrifice of obedience, thus granting them favorability to the Lord and strength. So,
hey, Bryce, question. How do you think this phrase "favored of the Lord" compares to being chosen of the Lord, particularly in light of what Denver stated in regards to the covenant last year and becoming a chosen people, and some of those things?
I think they're related. I think being favored and chosen, I mean, you have many are called, but few are chosen. But then what makes a person chosen? It goes back to being obedient and not seeking personal gain and all this stuff that's in section 121 of the LDS edition. But I mean, Denver has given one of my favorite examples of being chosen or being favored of the Lord. he gave an example of Hugh Nibley. Hugh Nibley was in World War II, and there's a story of Hugh Nibley driving up on his buggy with another guy, driving up with their Jeep up Normandy Beach. And there's a grenade that blows up right in front of them and creates a big hole right in front of their Jeep. And what happens to Hugh Nibley is they just kind of bounced right through it. And Hugh Nibley's like, huh, there's one there. This paraphrasing Hugh Nibley. There was one thing that went through my mind, and that was the Book of Mormon must be true. And the whole idea or the purpose of that story was that we could be, if we are favored of the Lord through obedience and we're chosen through sacrifice, that we could be in the middle of a war with grenades and gunfire and a whole bunch of bad stuff, and God will protect us. We'll be taken care of. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge. That's another really neat World War II movie about a gentleman who renounced using weapons of war, but he went to war and he became a medic, and he saved hundreds of people on the Pacific in the Pacific because of the things that he did. I think that has to do with it, and there's going to come a time in the near future where the world will be at war, and there will need to be a covenant chosen people, and that covenant chosen people will stand in holy places and will be protected even when there is chaos all around us. Did that answer your question? I don't know if that did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So it does say we were favored of the Lord, and then it goes on to say, thus were we favored. So it's kind of reiterating itself. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go down to paragraph 8. And in paragraph 8, it's the battle's over. And he's Helaman is writing to Moroni, describing the battle that just happened. And this is what he says. This is what Helaman says to Moroni in his letter. For as I had ever called them my sons, for they were all of them very young, even so they said unto me, Father, behold, our God is with us, and he will not suffer that we shall fall. And he will not suffer that we shall fall. Then let us go forth. We would not slay our brethren if they would let us alone. Therefore, let us alone, lest they should overpower the army of Antipas. Now they had fought, yet they did not fear death, and they did not think more upon the liberty of their fathers than they did upon their lives. Yea, and they had been taught by their mothers that if they did not doubt, that God would deliver them. And they rehearsed unto me the words of the mothers, saying, we do not doubt, our mothers knew it. Okay, so there's a couple of things here. And because of time, I'm probably just going to wrap up with this. Next week, we can finish this lesson because next week's lesson is really short. When I was planning the year, I knew that something looked off. So, the biggest things that I want to, the biggest thing that I want to take from this is that first, behold, our God is with us, and he will not suffer that we shall fall. This again reminds me of the faith of David and Goliath, the faith of Gideon's army. But what's even more than this is this: they did not fear death. I don't think it was because they were daredevils and they loved jumping out of airplanes and doing crazy things, and they loved the adrenaline rush of it all. I don't think that has to do with it at all. They did not fear death. I'm going to make my own insertion that may be appropriate or may not be, but I believe that they didn't fear death because they trusted that if it was their time to die, God would allow them to die. But if it wasn't, God would protect them. They were essentially giving their lives to God and then saying, okay, if you want me to die on the beach of Normandy by a grenade, I'll die. And I'm okay with that. If you want me to die by the hands of these Lamanites, then I'll die. But I'm putting all of my trust in you, and whatever is the outcome you want to have, I'm okay with that outcome. I'm not going to try to control this situation. We understand this situation, and we're putting all of our faith that whatever you want out of it, that'll be okay with us. That's my opinion. That's my opinion of why they didn't fear death. Because if you go back and our God is with us and will not suffer that we shall fall. This is the same faith of, if you think back to when the sons of Mosiah are going to their father Mosiah and saying, hey, Dad, we don't want the kingdom. We actually want to go up to the land of the Lamanites, the land of Lehi Nephi, and preach to them. And Mosiah's like, I don't know about that. But Mosiah gets a witness and a confirmation from God that his sons are going to be in the Lord's hands. So when Ammon is out there with the sheep, and there's a bunch of Lamanites coming to scatter the sheep, and he's just one guy, Ammon has the confidence now, because he was given that confidence from God that God would take care of him. So Ammon steps up and says, okay, this is what I can do. I can show God's strength, and we're gonna protect these sheep. It's one guy versus maybe 10 or 20, but this one guy did the job. That's the faith that the Ammonites have, and that's really the faith that we need to have as well. I'm going to jump down, finish this chapter, and then finish for today. But jump down to paragraph 12 and essentially read the whole thing. And now it came to pass that when they had surrendered themselves up unto us, behold, I numbered those young men who had fought with me, fearing lest there were many of them slain. But behold, to my great joy, there had not one soul of them fallen to the earth. Yea, they had fought as if with the strength of God. Yea, never were men known to have fought with such miraculous strength and with such mighty power. They fall upon the Lamanites, that they did frighten them, and for this cause did the Lamanites deliver themselves up as prisoners of war. Isn't it interesting that now we have again this strength of God reference, and it is attributed to miraculous strength or something that is divinely given to them. That again, we like to play with adjectives and we like to describe certain things. But I think that there's more to it here, that the Lord actually gave them strength, like David and Goliath, like the Gideonites, or the army of Gideon, like Ammon slaying or chopping off the arms. That this is a strength that the Lord gave these young men because of their faith. And then let's go down. There's a little bit more. Down to 18. So the people of Ammon and Antipas, they take over the Lamanites. They are able to get their cities, the city of Kumanai again. Some more descriptions of the Ammonites. Yea, and they did obey and observe to perform every word of command with exactness. Yea, and even according to their faith it was done unto them. And I did remember the words which they had said unto me, that their mothers had taught them. You know, there is a explanation of why it always refers to the mothers. I like the explanation. It's not necessarily what happened, but it does make some sense. That when the Lamanites came back when the Ammonites were still in the land of Lehi Nephi, that 1,000 people died falling on their swords. The thought is, well, those are probably their fathers. Their fathers died, but were murdered by the Lamanites. So that was the mothers that raised these young men, which definitely could be true. Continuing down, I want to finish with paragraph 19, and then we'll be done. Starting with nevertheless, and I'm going to finish here. Nevertheless, according to the goodness of God, and to the great astonishment and also the joy of our whole army, there was not one soul of them who did perish. Yea, neither was there one soul among them who had not received many wounds. And now their preservation was astonishing to our whole army. Yea, they should be spared, while there were 1,000 of our brethren who were slain. And we do justly describe it to the miraculous power of God, because of their exceeding faith in that which they had been taught to believe, that there was a God, and whosoever did not doubt that they should be preserved by his marvelous power. Now this was the faith of these of whom I have spoken. They were young, and their minds are firm, and they do trust their God in God continually. This again, right here, and we do justly ascribe it to the miraculous power of God, because of their exceeding faith in that which they had been taught to believe, that there was a just God, and whosoever did not doubt that they should be preserved by his marvelous power. Now this was the faith of these of whom I had spoken. They are young, and their minds are firm, and they do put their trust in God. This again reminds me of David and Goliath. It reminds me of David's faith going out to meet Goliath. That it's Denver talks about this in the Las Vegas talk number 8. This firm mind, this firm faith, talk number 8 in the 40 Years in Mormonism. He uses the example of David and Goliath. He also uses the example of the brother of Jared. And there's something there, like when we are firm and steadfast, when we don't doubt that we have faith in God, that these miracles can produce themselves. But next week we'll finish with the war chapters, and then essentially we finish the book of Alma, and then the first chapter of Helaman. We'll do that and go from there. But any other thoughts before we finish?
Yeah, one just real quick, as you were talking about these stripling warriors. I'm inclined to believe that the mighty strength, the power, and miraculous strength that they received perhaps had its beginnings with their parents who took the covenant that they did to refuse to take up arms, and that the seeds of the blessings that they could so readily see in this war had its beginnings back with their parents and the covenants that they took.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking the same thing. And this is just projecting, but it's interesting to think about is you have 1,000 of them that lay down their weapons of war and then get slaughtered by the Lamanites. How many of those, how much of that sacrifice did they make, or I'm not putting this well, how many of the individual sacrifices of those 1,000 translated into saving their sons? Like, is there, and I don't know if there is there a father laid his life down and by doing that sacrifice that preserved his son 15 years later? That is really, that's something to think about. All right. Well, appreciate it, and always enjoy doing these lessons. And any other thoughts before we finish? All right. Well, we'll see you next week, and thanks for letting us teach you.
Thanks, Bryce and Megan. Appreciate your contribution.
Thanks. Bye.